You stop moving. There's no specific trigger, you just stop. And the second you do, something surfaces, something that was underneath everything you were doing. It's quiet. It doesn't make noise. It just exists there, a pressure, a tightness in your chest with no obvious source. A restlessness that makes your hands search for something. Your phone, a screen, some task that has no real urgency. Anything to close the gap that just opened. This has happened before. Sunday afternoon. No plans. The freedom you wanted now feels like a problem. Or that morning when your schedule is empty and anxiety occupies the space where calm should be. Or finishing a project, reaching a goal, and finding emptiness where satisfaction was supposed to arrive. You labeled it boredom. You labeled it restlessness. A flaw in your character. It's none of these. It's something that lives underneath all the activity you use to avoid it. The instinct is immediate. Move again. Find something new to focus on. Rebuild the noise, pick up the phone, start a task, make plans. Do whatever keeps that pressure from intensifying. Stopping feels like malfunction, like something cracking open, like proof you're failing at something essential. Stay there and you might have to confront what you've been preventing yourself from seeing. The thing surfacing when you stop didn't just materialize, it's been present the whole time. You couldn't feel it while you were in motion. The life you built requires constant motion to stay intact. Motion is concealment. Every distraction you create, every obligation you accept, every source of stimulation you seek, none of it is building your life. It's preventing you from seeing what your life actually is underneath all of that. The collapse you feel when you stop isn't new. It was there before, underneath the productivity, underneath the routines, underneath the carefully maintained noise. You weren't living. You were outrunning. The moment you stop running, what you were running from arrives. Failure didn't cause this. Revelation did. The structure you built wasn't designed to be inhabited. It was designed to be survived. Survival only functions when you're moving fast enough to avoid looking at what you're surviving. The foundation was never solid. You were standing on acceleration. Acceleration feels like stability when you never slow down. The second you do, you notice there was nothing underneath holding you up. The confusion starts here. You think something went wrong. You think the stopping broke something. The stopping revealed something. What broke was already broken. The motion was just hiding it. You built a life that only works if you never examine it. And now you're examining it. And it's disintegrating under observation. Ralph Waldo Emerson observed this. He watched people construct entire lives around expectations that weren't theirs, marriages that belonged to someone else's vision, careers chosen to satisfy parents or society, identities built to meet standards they never questioned. And he noticed something specific. The cost didn't show up immediately. It showed up later, in silence, when the person was alone, when the performance stopped, when there was no audience left to impress. That's when the structure cracked. The person who spent decades living for external approval would suddenly find themselves unable to answer a simple question. What do I actually want? They had become so skilled at performing someone else's life that they lost access to their own. Emerson called this conformity, but conformity is too soft a word for what actually happens. It's erasure, the slow disappearance of the self underneath layers of acceptable behavior. The mechanism operates quietly. There's no dramatic moment of self-abandonment. You make adjustments, you notice what gets approval and what gets resistance. You start emphasizing certain behaviors, you start hiding others. This continues for months, then years. The hidden parts don't disappear immediately. They just stop being expressed. Then they stop being acknowledged. Then they become inaccessible. You reach a point where you're alone with yourself, and the person sitting there is unfamiliar, a stranger wearing your face. Emerson saw that the people who lived this way could maintain the structure for years, decades even, as long as they kept moving, as long as they stayed busy enough, distracted enough, validated enough by external markers of success. But the moment they stopped, the moment they retired or achieved the goal or lost the role that defined them, the structure collapsed, and they discovered they had been living on borrowed ground the entire time. Your life operates like a machine that only runs at high speed. Slow it down and the parts start grinding. Stop it completely and it seizes. This wasn't your choice. You inherited a template. The template came from everywhere. School taught you that idle time meant wasted potential. Work taught you that visibility equals value. Culture taught you that a full calendar signals importance. Social media taught you that if you're not producing, you're falling behind. Every empty hour became a problem requiring a solution. Every quiet moment registered as a threat. You scheduled yourself into constant motion, meetings, projects, social obligations, content consumption, fitness routines, side pursuits. The gaps vanished, and with them the discomfort vanished. You felt productive, you felt like someone who had their life together, but something was happening underneath that you couldn't see. The constant motion wasn't generating anything sustainable, it was generating dependency. You became dependent on the next thing, the next deadline, the next achievement, the next validation, the next distraction. Remove any of these, and the system destabilizes. Remove all of them, and the system collapses entirely. This is why your life falls apart when you stop. The life itself was never designed to exist in stillness. It was designed to exist in transit, like a bicycle that only stays upright while it's moving. The moment forward momentum stops, balance becomes impossible. You tip over, and you interpret this as personal failure, something wrong with you, weakness, inability to handle freedom or rest or success. But the failure isn't yours. The failure is structural. You built a life that requires constant external input to remain standing, and now the input has stopped. The notifications have slowed, the demands have decreased, the urgency has faded, and without those forces propping you up, you're experiencing what was always true. There was no internal architecture holding any of this together. Saturday morning arrives, no alarm, nothing scheduled. The freedom you claimed to want is finally here. And within 20 minutes, you're uncomfortable. You pick up your phone, you check things that don't need checking. You open apps with no particular intention. You're generating activity to avoid the stillness. The morning stretches out in front of you, and it feels like a problem. Or you complete something major, a deadline you met, a project you closed, a milestone you reached. The thing is done, and there's no satisfaction waiting on the other side. Just a brief pause before your mind starts searching for what comes next. The completion doesn't register as success. It registers as empty space that needs immediate filling. Or evening arrives and you're alone. No commitments, no messages, no one requiring your attention. You sit down. You try to settle into the quiet. But within minutes, you're restless. You turn on a show you're not really watching. You scroll while it plays. Two streams of stimulation running parallel. Neither one actually engaging you. Just layers of noise preventing something else from coming through. Or vacation. You planned it. You needed it. The first day passes. The second day starts, and discomfort creeps in. You feel wrong for not working. You check your inbox. You plan what happens when you return. Being present in rest feels impossible. The absence of structure creates its own form of anxiety. You don't know how to exist when nothing is pulling at you. Years of this. You called it discipline. You called it ambition. You called it being someone who doesn't waste time. But discipline doesn't require constant distraction. Ambition doesn't require compulsive motion. What you were calling drive was actually flight, and the speed made it impossible to see what you were fleeing. If any of this feels uncomfortably accurate, you're in the right place. This channel doesn't exist to distract you from what you're feeling. It exists to help you see what you've been avoiding. Consider subscribing. More clarity is coming. What happens next determines everything. You feel the collapse, you see the cracks, you recognize the pattern, and then the instinct arrives. The instinct to rebuild, to fix, to return to motion, new goals, new routines, new projects, new distractions, better ones this time, tighter ones, more convincing ones. The temptation is to go back to what worked before. And by worked, I mean what kept you numb. Society will support this completely. It will call your return to motion resilience. It will call it bouncing back, getting back on track, moving forward. It will never name what it actually is. Relapse. You're not recovering, you're retreating back into the same structure that collapsed, back into the same pattern that broke you, just with different labels and a fresh coat of paint. Emerson watched this happen repeatedly. People would glimpse the truth about their lives. They would see how much of what they were doing served no real purpose, how much of their identity was borrowed, how much of their effort was misdirected. And then they would panic. The truth was too destabilizing. So they would reconstruct the lie. They would go back to conforming, back to performing, back to living according to external standards. And they would convince themselves this was maturity, growth, being realistic. Emerson saw it differently. He saw it as surrender. The danger isn't the collapse is information. It's your life telling you something essential, that the way you've been living doesn't work, that the structure you built can't hold you. That motion was never the same as meaning. The danger is refusing to listen. Refusing to let the collapse teach you what it came to teach. Running again means running faster. The cracks will return. They always do. And each time they return, covering them will require more effort, more distraction, more speed, more deception. Eventually, you run out of capacity. The energy required to maintain the performance exceeds what you have available. And when that happens, the collapse won't be something you can escape by moving, it will be something you're forced to face. The question is whether you face it now, while you still have the strength to rebuild honestly, or later when you've exhausted yourself trying to avoid it. The collapse isn't asking you to fix yourself. It's asking you to stop pretending, to stop performing a version of life that only functions when you're not paying attention, to stop waiting for external permission to be who you actually are. What the collapse reveals is direct. You've been living according to a design you didn't choose. You absorbed it, from parents, from teachers, from culture, from peers, from every system that rewarded compliance and punished deviation. And you followed that design because following felt safer than choosing, easier than questioning, more acceptable than resistance. So you built the life you were supposed to build. You pursued the goals you were supposed to pursue. You became the person you were supposed to become. And for a while it worked well enough. The structure held. The performance was convincing. You looked functional from the outside. But now the structure is failing. And you're seeing what was always underneath. A life that belongs to someone else. The collapse is giving you a choice. You can rebuild the same architecture with stronger materials, better distractions, tighter routines, more sophisticated methods of avoidance. You can go back to the pattern that just broke and convince yourself that this time it will be different. Or you can build something that doesn't require constant maintenance to stay standing, something that doesn't collapse the moment you stop moving, something that can hold you when you're still. That doesn't mean abandoning responsibility. It doesn't mean walking away from everything you've built. It means asking a question you've been delaying for years. Is this mine? Is this life actually mine, or am I maintaining it because stopping feels impossible? Are these goals mine, or did I inherit them without ever questioning where they came from? Is this identity mine, or is it the one I constructed to survive a world that punishes authenticity? The collapse doesn't provide answers. It provides space. Space to ask questions you couldn't ask while you were moving. Questions that only become visible when the noise stops. Questions that feel dangerous, because answering them honestly might require changing everything. But avoiding them is more dangerous. Avoiding them means returning to a life that only works if you never examine it. And you've already started examining it. You can't unsee what you've seen. This is where real life begins, not the performed version, not the one designed to impress others or meet standards or accumulate achievements, the inhabited version. The one you actually live in when no one is watching, the one that doesn't require you to run from it. Emerson spent his entire life articulating one principle in different forms: self-reliance. But self-reliance wasn't what people thought it was. It wasn't arrogance, it wasn't isolation. It wasn't rejecting help or community or connection. It was something more fundamental. It was internal fidelity. The willingness to trust what you know to be true, even when everything around you contradicts it. Even when society punishes you for it. Even when it costs you approval, status, or security. He believed that courage wasn't heroic action. It wasn't grand gestures or dramatic stands. It was quiet adherence to internal truth. Staying aligned with what you know when no one else can see it, when there's no audience, no reward, no recognition, just the choice between lying to yourself or not. He saw that most people spend their entire lives waiting for external validation to give them permission to exist as themselves, and they die waiting. The permission never arrives, not from parents, not from partners, not from career success, not from social approval. It only comes from within. And it only comes when you stop running long enough to ask what you actually believe, not what you were taught to believe, not what you're expected to believe, not what's safe to believe, what you know to be true when no one is watching, when there's no performance required, when there's no one to impress or convince or satisfy, just you and the question. What do I actually know? What do I actually value? What am I actually willing to build my life around? Emerson understood that answering these questions honestly would make you uncomfortable. It would separate you from people who are still performing. It would expose the gap between who you are and who you've been pretending to be. It would force you to make choices that look irrational from the outside. But he also understood that avoiding these questions was worse. Avoiding them meant spending your entire existence as a guest in your own life, never fully present, never fully yourself, always maintaining a performance that exhausts you but never satisfies you. The collapse is asking you Emerson's question, and it won't stop asking until you answer it. Your life falls apart when you stop escaping. The structure collapses because it was never designed to be lived consciously. It was designed to be survived, and survival requires motion, constant motion, enough speed to prevent you from noticing what you're actually doing, enough distraction to keep certain questions from forming, enough noise to drown out the parts of yourself you've been taught to ignore. But living requires something different. It requires presence. The capacity to remain with what's uncomfortable, the willingness to see what you've been avoiding, The strength to sit with the truth about how you've been spending your time, your energy, your attention, and the honesty to admit that much of what you've built serves no one. Just the system that taught you to measure your worth by how much you produce and how little you question. The collapse isn't the end. It's also not comfort. It's the point where running stops working, where the pattern breaks, where the old structure can no longer hold, and where choosing becomes unavoidable. You can rebuild the same thing and hope it lasts longer this time. Or you can build something different, something that doesn't require you to escape from it, something that can hold you when you're still. What you do with that moment is entirely yours. No one can take it from you. No one can do it for you. No one can tell you what the right choice is. The right choice isn't universal, it's personal, and finding it requires you to stop listening to every voice that isn't yours, to stop optimizing for approval, to stop performing for an audience that doesn't exist, and to start asking what you actually want your life to be when no one else is watching. The collapse gave you that space. What you build in it determines everything.